want you to just picture the average Tuesday night, you're on the couch, you're bored, and you think, I want to go to Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe swing by Rome for a late dinner.
Yeah.
And finish up with some drinks in Prague.
That's quite a trip. Usually that itinerary would involve, what, a travel agent, probably a second mortgage, and at least 3 days of jet lag.
Not to mention a very understanding boss.
Yeah, exactly.
But imagine if you could do that whole trip, Tokyo, Rome, Prague, without ever leaving your own city limits. And imagine doing it in 1969.
It sounds like a logistical impossibility, especially for the city we're talking about, which is Toronto, Canada. But we have to be really clear here. This is not the Toronto of today.
Right, because if you walk down a Toronto street now, it's basically the United Nations. You hear like a dozen languages, you smell spices from everywhere. The city's own trademark is the world's in a city.
Sure.
But we're talking about 50 plus years ago. What was the vibe then?
Oh, think gray, think British. It was often called Toronto the Good, and, that wasn't really a compliment. It was more a comment on how boring it was.
Right.
The sidewalks rolled up on Sundays. The demographic was, well, overwhelmingly white, Protestant, and pretty reserved. It was a city where exotic food probably meant putting a little extra black pepper on your mashed potatoes.
So into the middle of this monochrome conservative city, something just explodes, a splash of color that cracks the whole facade. And that is what we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into the Metro Toronto International Caravan, or just Caravan. And specifically, we were zeroing in on that very first year, 1969.
And this is just a masterclass in cultural engineering. I mean, we're looking at how two visionaries, a cheap paper booklet, and a fleet of city buses didn't just provide a weekend of fun, they fundamentally rewired the psychology of a major city.
Let's start with the people who lit the match.
Yeah.
Leon and Zena Kasser. Who were they?
They were the founders, and they were looking at Toronto with a really specific lens. They saw that the diversity was already there. I mean, the immigrants were there, Italians, Ukrainians, Poles, West Indians, but they were kind of invisible to the mainstream. They were in these little silos, their own community halls, church basements. The Kossers had seen European folk festivals, and they had this radical idea. What if we just open the doors?
Open the doors sounds nice and poetic, but getting that reserved, British descendant population to just walk into a stranger's ethnic community center, that's a hard sell. You need a mechanism.
Yeah.
And this is the part of the story I'm just obsessed with. They didn't sell tickets. They sold a passport.
This is the stroke of genius. It's marketing 101. If you sell a ticket, you're selling a transaction. A ticket gets you a seat. But a passport gives you an identity. Exactly. That is the psychological unlock. It costs $2, which is about $15 today, so, incredibly cheap. But that passport to the world did two things. First, it literally granted you entry to every pavilion.
Okay.
But second, it gamified the entire experience before gamification was even a word.
Because of the stamps, right?
The stamps were everything. You walk into a pavilion, you hand over your passport, and you get an official ink stamp. Suddenly, this isn't just learning about culture. It's a scavenger hunt. It's competitive.
Oh, I can just imagine the scene at the water cooler the next morning. It's all about bragging rights. Oh, you only went to 4 countries. That's cute. I hit 9.
It turned cultural exploration into a status symbol. But think about that permission angle you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
In 1969, if you're a guy named Bob from some quiet suburban neighborhood, you are probably not going to just walk into the local Lithuanian church basement on a Friday night. You'd feel like an intruder.
Totally. You'd feel like you walked into the wrong room.
But if you have a passport, now you are an official tourist. You have documents. You are supposed to be there. It lowered the social barrier to entry to almost zero.
So you have your passport, you're ready to travel. Now we have to talk about where you're going. Because when I hear festival, I think of a fairground, a big convention center, booths in rows, overpriced popcorn.
And that's exactly what made Caravan so different. It was decentralized. There was no central hub. The pavilions were the actual cultural centers of these communities.
That's wild to me. So the German pavilion wasn't some tent in a park. It was the actual German community club.
Right. And the Ukrainian pavilion was in a Ukrainian labor temple or a church hall. This changes the vibe completely. You aren't bringing the culture to some neutral, sterile ground. You are inviting the city into your living room.
That feels incredibly intimate, but also A logistical nightmare. I mean, if you've got venues scattered all across the GTA, how do you get people there?
Well, you can't just expect everyone to drive from church basement to church basement. So enter the caravan buses. The city organized a dedicated fleet of them, decorated with flags, running on a loop from 6:00 p.m. to midnight.
Okay, paint me a picture. It's 1969. You're on a city bus. What's the vibe? Because usually a city bus is where you avoid eye contact and try not to touch anyone.
This was the opposite. By all accounts, these buses were just rowdy, joyous chaos. You have to imagine you've got people hopping on who just came from the beer hall and the German pavilion, maybe a little tipsy.
Sure.
Then you have a family coming from the Japanese pavilion. Strangers are comparing stamps in their passports, so there's probably someone playing an accordion in the back. The transit system itself became the circulatory system of the festival.
A moving party. But let's talk about what happened when you got off the bus. Because you weren't just there to look at costumes, you were there to eat.
The food. I mean, this is arguably the most impactful legacy of the whole project.
We have to put this in context for anyone listening today. I can pull out my phone and order Ethiopian, Thai, or Peruvian food to my door in 30 minutes. But in 1969...
In 1969, the culinary landscape was beige. For the average Torontonian, eating out meant a diner or a steakhouse. Maybe Chinese food, but, a very westernized version of it.
So let's go back to our friend Bob, the mild-mannered suburban guy. He gets off the bus, he walks into a venue, and what hits him?
Garlic, cumin, paprika. Smells that he literally might never have encountered in his entire life. The source material is really clear that for thousands of people, Caravan was the first time, the absolute first time they tasted a pierogi.
A pierogi. That feels like such a staple now. It's like saying it's the first time they saw a sandwich.
Or souvlaki, or schnitzel, or real spicy curry. And the key here is authentic, because these were not commercial restaurant vendors, no chains involved. These kitchens were run by the grandmothers of the community.
So you're getting the real deal. You're getting the recipe that's been in the family for 4 generations, cooked by the women who know it best.
Exactly. There's a certain kind of pride in that food. They're not trying to modify it for the Canadian palate. They're saying, this is what we eat, try it. And for a lot of visitors, it was a sensory shock.
I can just picture it.
You can imagine people sweating through their shirts, trying a spicy curry, but loving the thrill of it. It broke down the fear of the other right through the stomach.
Gastronomic diplomacy. Okay, so we're full of pierogies and we're back on the bus. I want to look at the map of 1969. Because when I look at the list of the 29 original pavilions, something just jumps out immediately. The names.
Yeah, it's a very specific quirk of that first year, 1969. They didn't name the pavilions after countries, they named them after cities.
Which seems kind of confusing, right? Why go to the Paris pavilion instead of the France pavilion? Why Tokyo instead of Japan?
Well, it's actually brilliant branding. Countries are political. They have borders, armies, governments. But cities are about people. Cities are cosmopolitan hubs. By calling it a tour of great cities, it reinforces the idea that Toronto is becoming a world city by connecting with other world cities.
It also feels a little more romantic, doesn't it? I'm going to Vienna. Sounds a bit better than I'm going to Austria.
It does. Let's actually look at that list, because it is staggering for a first-year event. 29 pavilions.
I want to run through these, but let's not just, read a list. Let's group them, because looking at it, you can really see the demographics of the city at the time. Let's start with Western Europe. This feels like the safe zone for our friend Bob.
Sure. You had the classics, the London Pavilion, obviously, Paris for the French community.
Then you have Rome for Italy, Madrid for Spain, Lisbon for Portugal.
And the Nordic bloc was huge, which might surprise people today.
Yeah.
You had Copenhagen for Denmark, Stockholm for Sweden, Oslo for Norway, Helsinki for Finland.
And Reykjavik for Iceland. That is a lot of pickled herring.
Laughs. A lot of herring. And then the Germanic region. Vienna for Austria, Zurich for Switzerland, and Brussels for Belgium. But let's pause on the German pavilion for a second. It was listed as Bonn, Berlin.
Bonn, Berlin. That little slash is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It is. Remember, this is 1969. Germany is divided. Berlin is divided by a wall. Bonn was the capital of West Germany. So even in the name, you see the geopolitics just creeping in.
Which brings us to the Eastern Bloc. And this is where that whole city naming thing gets really interesting and, frankly, a little political.
This is the heart of the deep dive right here.
Yeah.
You have to remember the Cold War context. The Iron Curtain is up. But in Toronto, you have these huge diasporic communities from Eastern Europe who had fled communism or war.
So when they set up a pavilion, it's not just a party, it's a statement.
Precisely. Look at the list. Warsaw for Poland, Budapest for Hungary, Bucharest for Romania. These were all countries behind the Iron Curtain at the time.
And then you have Prague.
Prague for the Czech community. And remember, 1968, just 1 year before that, was the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring. The wounds were fresh.
Wow.
So walking into the Prague Pavilion in Toronto in 1969, that wasn't just tourism, that was an act of solidarity.
And then there's Kyiv.
This is so significant. In 1969, Ukraine was not an independent country. It was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, part of the USSR. You couldn't just fly to Kyiv and experience Ukrainian culture freely without that Soviet overlay. But in Toronto, you could.
So for the Ukrainian community, the Kyiv Pavilion was basically a way of saying, we exist, this is our culture, and it's distinct from the Soviet Union.
Exactly. It was an act of preservation. The source material mentions that Prague and Kyiv were massive draws. People flocked to them. And it wasn't just for the food. It was because these communities were putting their heart and soul into showing the world who they really were, free from censorship.
It's heavy when you think about it. We're dancing and drinking, but for the hosts, this is about survival.
Peace through culture was the slogan, but for some of them, it was really resistance through culture.
Let's just round out the map, because it wasn't only Europe.
No, and this is where you start to see the shift in Toronto's immigration patterns. You had the Middle East and Asia represented, Jerusalem for the Israeli community, Amman for the Arab and Jordanian community.
Tokyo for Japan, Seoul for Korea.
And you can't forget the Americas. There was the Port of Spain Pavilion representing the West Indian and Trinidadian community.
Which brings a totally different energy steel drums, carnival vibes compared to, a quiet church hall in the suburbs.
The contrast is the whole point. You could go from listening to a waltz in Vienna to hearing calypso in Port of Spain in 20 minutes. That juxtaposition is the Toronto experience.
So 1969 is a massive hit. The buses are full. The passports are stamped. Everyone is full of pirogues. What happens next?
It just exploded. It became the defining event of the summer. By the mid-70s, it wasn't 29 pavilions anymore. It was over 50. They had to extend it from a few days to 9 full days.
9 days. That's an endurance sport.
It was. And it inspired copycats. The most famous one is Caravan out in Mississauga, which is still running today. Caravan really proved that this model, the pavilion tour, worked.
The Caravan isn't here anymore.
No. It folded in 2003.
Which, honestly, feels like a tragedy given how incredible it sounds. Why did it die? Was it just money?
Money is always part of it. I mean, running a fleet of buses and coordinating 50 venues is expensive. But there's a much more fascinating theory about why it ended.
Which is?
That it died of success.
Explain that. How do you die of success?
Well, think about the mission back in 1969. The mission was to introduce Torontonians to the hidden cultures of their city, to give them permission to try the food, hear the music.
Okay, yeah.
But by 2003, those cultures weren't hidden anymore. The city had completely changed. You didn't need a passport and a special festival to get authentic souvlaki. You just went to the Danforth. You didn't need a special occasion to eat curry. You just went to Little India.
I see. So the world in a city concept that they were trying to build, they actually built it.
Precisely. The festival was a bridge. And once the two sides are connected, once the diversity is integrated into the daily fabric of the city, you don't really need the bridge in the same way. The novelty of the foreigner was replaced by the familiarity of the neighbor.
That is a wildly profound way to look at a festival closing down. It didn't fail. It completed its mission.
In a way, yeah. We stopped visiting the other because they stopped being other.
Although I have to say, I really miss the idea of the bus. There's something about that collective experience, everyone doing it together, that you just don't get by ordering takeout.
That's the trade-off. We gained convenience and daily integration, but we lost that focused moment of community celebration.
So Leon and Zena Kassar, they started with a dream, $2 and a lot of volunteers. And they ended up changing the DNA of the city.
They took a black and white city and turned it into Technicolor.
It's an amazing story. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought based on what you just said about it dying of success.
Go for it.
If the disappearance of Caravan is actually a sign that integration worked, what does that say about how we celebrate culture today? If we no longer need a passport to visit our neighbors because their food and their culture are just part of our Tuesday night, have we achieved the ultimate goal? Or, by losing the festival, have we lost the intentional act of celebration? Does true integration mean we stop celebrating difference, or just that we stop noticing it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is the goal to be a mosaic where every piece is bright and distinct, or a melting pot where it all kind of blends together?
Something to chew on while you eat your lunch today, whatever global cuisine that might be. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
See you next time.